I'm Avram Friedman. I'm the executive director of the Canary Coalition, and I'm sitting here with Jamie DeMarco, a student at Warren Wilson College, and Jean Larson, a member of the board of the Canary Coalition. The three of us separately attended the People's Climate March that took place on September 21st of this year. And we're here to give our impressions of what happened on that day, to relate some of our experience and what we felt came out of this march and where it will go from here. In the background, you will be watching the march as it goes by, and the various signs and groups of people and the floats, the elaborate floats, reminding us somewhat of the Macy's Day Parade. When I was a child, we used to watch the Macy's Day Parade on television, and commentators would talk about the floats as they went by. And we're going to be going through somewhat of the same process, but we're also going to be having more comprehensive conversation about climate. So let's start out with you, Jamie. Why don't you give us a synopsis of what your experience was, starting from the trip there and the camaraderie of the people and your entire experience with the climate change march.
My experience with the climate march was one of feeling empowered and seeing the solidarity that exists for this cause in so many different places, and watching the passion for this issue really come out of the woodwork. I think there are times when we're fighting to stop climate change or thinking about climate change when it's easy to feel alone or as if the challenge is too big, and there's this sort of instinct to roll over and just give up. But I think the experience of going out and seeing people come out of every aspect of your life and then riding for hours and sleeping in ridiculous places just to get to this march, and knowing that people all around the country did the same thing, really empowers you to know that we have the capacity to shape what our future looks like.
Yeah. Have you been to other climate or other marches or for other causes similar to this? I mean, how did this differ from others that you've been to?
I was at the Forward on Climate March, which until the People's Climate March was the biggest gathering for climate change in the United States ever.
That one at the Washington Monument.
The Washington Monument, that was 40,000. This march was 400,000. And that has an entirely different feel to it. At the Forward on Climate, you could look and you could see everyone. You could all be captured in your gaze. But in New York City, it went on. You could have walked for hours against the tide and you wouldn't have reached the end. It was miles of people.
Yeah.
I think Washington, D.C. sees marches in the tens of thousands on a regular basis. But a march this size comes along once in a generation.
And Jean, what was your experience like going to and participating in the march?
What struck me was how positive everyone was on the bus, and just people you ran into, how everybody was talking to everybody. You know, it's like you all knew each other, even though you just saw them for the first time, because you had something in common. And they were caring and generous with helping people and making way for people. Everybody was working together, and it just showed the possibility of what we could do if we all worked together. And these people were from so many different walks of life. I saw some people who just came out, some older people who just came out to see what it was. They were so impressed, walking with canes, and never been to anything like that, and there they were, joining in.
There's some Native Americans who are watching right
Yes.
now. We're walking by with a pretty elaborate float that they built. Well, yeah, and I was awestruck by it, and I was with my partner, Kerry Rayburn, and what we did was we planted ourselves at Columbus Circle, right where it turned. You know, people were lined up all the way for a mile or more up the Central Park West, and it turned at Columbus Circle and went on to Central Park South, which is also 59th Street. And there was another stream of people coming from 58th Street, the religious community and the spiritual community, and they were backed up as far as you could see as well. And our plan was to stand there at that corner and watch the entire parade go by, which we thought would take about an hour. and then we would join at the end and go down. Well, 3 hours later, we were still standing there, and there was no end in sight. And I mean, I have in my lifetime been to many large demonstrations, and I think this was the biggest one, including during the 60s. I was at some very large anti-war demonstrations and civil rights demonstrations, and this was most impressive. And yeah, you couldn't help but notice the tremendous diversity of people that were there, and not only of people, but of the causes that were represented that tied into climate change. And I think that is what makes the difference between a demonstration and a movement. You know, if you really tried to define a single purpose why people were there, you probably couldn't do it. But yet there was a cohesion to it and a central purpose that brought in the issues of fracking and coal ash and civil rights and income diversity and so many other causes that really can all be tied together and in manifesting climate change. And I think that's what has come out of this march is a movement, a true blooming of a movement, and the sense that this is just beginning now, and that the impact that we're going to see is going to be more dramatic at this point. And let's not forget, what we're watching is only one demonstration that took place on that day. They were taking place, I believe, in 159 other countries simultaneously.
Thousands of demonstrations.
All over the world, all over the country, there were similar demonstrations. This may have been the largest one, it may not have been, and there may have been some bigger ones in other countries. But this was a tremendous demonstration. And of course, this was coinciding with a gathering of world leaders at the United Nations half a mile away on the east side of Manhattan. And President Obama was there, and many world leaders. And Obama, to his credit, talked about this march in his speech, and he referred to it, saying we can't ignore what's going on outside in the streets. You know, and it's rare that a political leader will do that, but such was the impact of this march. There's the Hare Krishnas we're watching now as they go by. They were pretty prominent where we were standing, and everybody got into the spirit. You know, there was no sense of rivalry or anything else. Everybody, when the Hare Krishna people came by, everybody was singing Hare Krishna. When other groups came by, then there were many chants, and there were waves. Did you take part in the waves that came by?
I think that was the most incredible part of the whole thing.
When there was silence, and there was silence, and then having the waves, the hands going up and joining. And I don't know if we were supposed to join. We joined hands where we were, and that was really powerful.
It
as
was.
far as we could see, all these
And
hands
there were
raised
several
up
ways
together.
that we experienced, and I guess what was happening was that it would start at one end of the parade, the march, which at this point had gone on for hours, and so there were still people at the beginning, and there were already people gathering at the end, which was about, I don't know, it was down at 32nd Street and 11th Avenue. And this is 59th Street and 7th Avenue where we're looking at right now. And I think what was going on was that the wave would start at at the bottom end and work its way up all the way in the street, and then it would hit the end and it would come back again. I think that's what was going on, but it was very moving and intense when it took place.
I agree that the first time it happened, the first time the wave came over us,
Yeah.
it began with the moment of silence where the whole march stopped and stood in silent solidarity with people all over the world who are experiencing the effects of climate change today. And like I said earlier, we're talking miles of people.
Yeah.
And in the very back, the roar started. And when there was silence, you could hear it coming from miles away, and building and building and building and building and building until it reached you, and your voice joined it,
Yeah.
and you propelled it forward. And it was the most encompassing, visceral demonstration of human passion I've ever experienced.
Yeah. This was a group of Hispanic people that came. That was Mama Sita Earth, or it was Mother Earth in Spanish. We missed the sign as it went by there. But,
Looks like she's dancing.
Yeah. No, it was awesome. The people that were controlling that big puppet. And so the issue comes up of, okay, so we've gathered this massive movement together now, and it's becoming more and more organized. And where do we go from here with this movement? What do you feel is your next step? You know, as a student at Warren Wilson College, and what involvement do you have in terms of the organization of this movement?
Well, first I want to say that it's absolutely true that what's most important about the march is what you do when you come home. That you keep that solidarity with you, and you become the climate champion you have to be, that we all have to be, to start transforming the way this world works. And I think this march marked this issue as the defining issue of our time, which is so hard to do now. There's so much noise, there's so many people vying for attention. But only one issue can turn people out in this size, and it's climate change. And there's no more denying it. This is the defining issue of our time. And that momentum is so important. At Warren Wilson, we're working on divesting our endowment from fossil fuels, precluding the 200 dirtiest fossil fuel companies from our investments. And we were just speaking with a potential investment firm today who was saying that the investment community, the higher-ups in the investment community, are in the process of deciding whether or not they want to consider fossil fuel companies a dangerous investment. And they're not going to consider them a dangerous investment until they believe that the world has the political will to act on climate, to keep carbon in the ground and stay below 2 degrees Celsius global temperature change. And so there's this sort of like feedback loop where if the momentum grows big enough and there's enough political will and we're strong enough and united enough, these investment firms are going to start considering fossil fuels a dangerous investment and start pulling money out of them, and people see that, and that builds the movement more, which can build more action, which can build further financial divestment. And it's all this feedback loop that we're getting started, and we're hitting record speeds with this march.
In fact, I think the day before, or maybe it was the day after the climate march, the Rockefeller family announced that they were divesting of
The
all
oil
fossil
barons
fuel
are
companies,
divesting.
which was an amazingly powerful announcement for
Who
them
believed
to make.
that?
Yeah.
This is no longer the issue that your hippie grandma cares about.
Mhm.
This is the issue that is taking up the minds of the Rockefellers, of reputable organizations, and that the whole world is saying, this is important. This is something we need to act on.
And I think you've hit the nail on the head when you talk about economics being the way to address climate change, because economics is what motivates the world. You know, it motivates people. It's the mechanism by which we operate and which will create the changes. And as long as the as fossil fuels are considered the less expensive, more practical way of producing energy and providing transportation for us, then we'll never be able to address climate change on a scale that's necessary to reverse it in time to avoid the worst impacts of climate change. And so we really need to, I believe, work on changing those economics in any way that we can. Yes, divestiture is extremely important, and just getting people to do that voluntarily. But I think we also need to work on changing government policies so that right now government policies are geared toward making it easy for fossil fuels to be drilled and mined, and I mean there are all kinds of tax incentives and perks that the government gives to companies that explore our national lands for natural gas, for instance, and oil and coal. And I think we need to make that politically inadvisable for our leaders to continue policies like that. And we need to create policies which make solar and wind energy and geothermal energy and wind and tides and ocean waves and other renewable resources more viable economically. And it really is just a matter of policy. It's not necessarily a question of technology and the availability of technology, but it's a question of what direction our policies favor. Our government policies.
Like right now, we hear so much about water issues in the far west, in California, and they still have their water utilities like our electric utilities, giving lower rates to people who use more. The more you use, the lower the rate gets,
Right.
even though they are in drastic rates.
Yes.
And so we get to change that.
We do, and in fact, the Canary Coalition has introduced legislation in North Carolina that would change that. That would invert the utility rate structure so that when you use more energy, you pay more per kilowatt, and when you use less energy, you pay less per kilowatt. It's called a tiered rate block structure that exists in other states and other countries, very successfully reducing energy consumption through investment in energy efficiency, rooftop solar energy systems, cogeneration systems in industries. And that is something the Canary Coalition and other groups that are working with us are working on. I'd like to talk further with you and maybe come talk to Warren Wilson about that as well.
We'd love to have you over.
Yeah.
And I agree with what you're saying, that it's a market battle. That and this is such an exciting time to be watching this.
You know, it's still
Oh, aren't they amazing?
Yeah.
I didn't see that.
Well, I don't know if you've seen about Naomi Klein's latest book, and I won't come up with the title, but
This changes everything, right?
yes, this changes everything, but what she was realizing is people don't want to talk about the environment, but they all want to talk about the economy. So, great, I'll talk about the economy. and how that is affecting all of the climate change drivers.
And-
So,
And when Bill McKibben first came out with The End of Nature, climate change was comfortably housed under the umbrella of environmentalism. That's sort of where it was incepted. But since then, it's exploded. It's ballooned into something that is so much larger than an environmental movement. Like you were saying, there were so many causes brought together at the march. There was language around income inequality, because the structure of centralized distribution epitomizes control of power by a small percentage. There was language around Palestine and Israel, just because war is such a carbon-intensive industry. There's language around concentrated animal feeding operations, because they have such a large greenhouse gas footprint. And I saw one sign that just read, "Gay rights and climate change." that this is really an issue that touches everyone. We're beginning to realize that any hope, any dream you have for the future is contingent upon a stable climate. This is the most common denominator, and it's no longer an environmental issue, it's a human issue. This is not, it's not tree huggers fighting this, it's people huggers.
And it's an economic issue, it's a spiritual issue. And just to sum up the economic discussion, Bill McKibben's article in Rolling Stone magazine last year really threw me for a loop when I read it and understood what he was talking about.
You're talking about global warming's terrifying new math?
Yes, and the fact that our whole economy is tied up in fossil fuels right now and is basically mortgaged to the fossil fuels that are still in the ground, and that's what we're up against. The centralized power system, utility system, energy system, transportation system that we have is dependent. Its economic viability is dependent on harvesting the fossil fuels that are still in the ground. And so what that means is that we need to basically change the nature of our economic system if we're going to address climate change, because if we don't, those who are in control of our and indebted to our system right now must, in order to survive, harvest those fossil fuels that are still in the ground. And I think that outlines the political struggle that's ahead in uprooting that, for lack of a better word, evil that's in control of our political system.
well, just yesterday, I think there was an article in the Wall Street Journal about fracking, companies doing fracking, and what they report to the
Yes, I saw
like
that,
the environmental, the differences. So they report one number, which is lower.
Number of
to
what?
A number of how much they have produced or their
Or
output.
how much, for instance, in North Carolina, they'll say there's so much potential underground in natural gas, but they'll say one thing to regulators, and they'll tell their investors.
Right.
a
And it's
different
the
number.
Oh my
investors they
gosh.
tell it's a much larger number.
Yeah.
So they're telling the state and their investors two totally
Two
different
totally
numbers.
different numbers.
That is incredibly irresponsible.
So that for the investors, it looks great. And if you're not reading anything else, if you are not aware of energy issues, that's just going to look like a fantastic investment.
Mm.
And how that is even possible,
Yeah.
it's mind-boggling.
Well, and then there's the whole issue of who the regulators are and how they got
Right.
to where they are. The fact that they have there's the revolving door between industry and government regulators in many states and the federal government, and certainly it's true here in North Carolina, where you see the Department of Environment and Natural Resources, the head administrators, at one time or another came from Duke Energy
Yeah.
administrative positions or progress energy administrative positions. And the same is true of the Mining and Energy Commission. There are 15 members of the Mining and Energy Commission, and if you look at it, it's a who's who
Halliburton.
it's a who's who in the industry that's in charge. Fox is absolutely watching the hen house in so many ways. And so that brings into this whole thing into the issue of money in politics and the Move to Amend group, who are also there. People who are calling for a constitutional amendment to end corporate personhood and to declare that money is not the equivalent of free speech, and that the federal and state governments have a perfect right to regulate political campaign contributions made by corporations to political campaigns. That's all part of the climate change fight. You know?
All part of the climate change fight.
Yeah.
Which I think, as you were saying, was really revolutionized by Bill McKibben's article, Global Warming's Terrifying New Math. Because for decades, the language was around peak oil, peak fossil fuel. The idea that we need to get out before it starts running out. And that article really made clear, if we wait for it to start running out, we're doomed. That we need to get into the streets and march to leave fossil fuels in the ground.
Absolutely.
And that, I think that's why a lot of people that we're looking at now are in the streets. I think that changed the whole conversation around climate
It
change.
was a great quote, and I can't remember who made it now, but it was that the Stone Age didn't end because we ran out of stones.
Oh, that is brilliant. And the oil age won't end because we ran out of oil. It's because we find better solutions that are more humane, more equitable, provide a better quality of life.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Wow. I like that a lot.
And then there was a whole spiritual aspect of this march as well. Like I said, up on Central Park West, as far as the eye could see, were environmental organizations and civic organizations and students and so many other political causes. But on 58th Street, backed up all the way to the Hudson River, was the spiritual community.
Wow.
And they had some amazing exhibits. We'll see them later. They had the police directed it so that first people came down off of Central Park West, and then they stopped those, and people started getting pretty angry because they had to wait so long. But then they started to allow some from the spiritual community come off 58th Street. And that went on for about an hour, and then they started coming again from Central Park West. But the spiritual community, I mean, that's a whole other aspect that is also important. I mean, we spoke of the importance of economics, and that the two aren't necessarily totally unrelated, but religion and spirituality is another very powerful driving force on Earth. You know, I mean, there are wars fought over religion,
and I think it's incredible to see the growing creation care movement
Yes.
that's been springing up, of people of faith saying, this is important, and God created this world, or God is a steward of this world, and we have to help him.
Right. And I think that it's so important that we get involved. You know, there is that tendency of people, I don't really want to say political left, but I guess that's the only reference I can use. I think that's an anachronistic term. I don't think it's left and right anymore, really. I think it's people who are conscious or people who are unconscious, moreover. But there is a propensity on the part of, let's say, progressive people in progressive causes to forget about the spiritual community and not approach the issue from that perspective. And I think it's a huge mistake, because that's where the hearts and minds of people are, you know, especially in a state like North Carolina. If you want to meet the community, you go to the churches.
Yeah. And it's one of the only institutions we have that's driven entirely by morality. People show up there only because they care about what's right in the world.
And that's what struck me here. Everybody cared. That was the unifying factor. They cared, and you could just feel it. They were very genuine.
Yes. And it's so heartening to see so many religious groups getting involved in this. And again, it's not a matter of left and right, because I think there are Christian conservatives now who are becoming involved in the climate issue. And it's very important. You know, it hasn't always been true that the religious community has been, you know, among conservatives and backwards thinking, as we tend to reference.
Quakers were some of the first abolitionists.
That's right. And people, women's suffrage people were very religious people as well. The abolitionism, absolutely, and people in the labor movement. A lot of the labor songs that were sung became the anthems of the movement were, you know, gospel music. and I think we really, really need to bring it back to that. And I saw that happening on September 21st. There were so many groups, and labor was there. It's so important to involve working people and the labor movement. That just before the march started, Terry and I we walked down to around 57th Street, and there was a gathering happening there of labor unions that were in support of climate, you know, working on climate change issues. And they were singing, and that was one of the most lively gatherings, and I have some footage of that as well. It was great. They even made the police dance. There were cops there who were really getting into it. And I have to say, just as a note, that the police were completely cooperative in this. They were helpful, and there were no incidents of violence. You know, this was not Ferguson.
And this is the first time I'm seeing this, because we were far back enough that we actually were almost crushed together for 2 hours.
Yeah.
And then we finally got up to the point where you turned, and all of the religious people were coming in, and then we had to wait again. So we never really got to see much of anything. But I still did have a chance to talk to a lot of people. So
did you get to talk with people from other parts of the, from
we
everywhere?
had someone that I was with. There are 3 of us from the Asheville area, and somebody had a sign that said Asheville. So a lot of people came up and said, "Oh, I've been to Asheville, or that's so beautiful there," and we just started talking. Interestingly, there's a woman who was from Chapel Hill, and she came and she said, "Oh, Asheville." I said, "Oh, I watched the hearing out in Callaway, and it was just wonderful." And anyway. And there was a man, and I thought he was in his, I thought he was like my age. And he ended up giving me his card because he was interested in finding out about the Moral Mondays. But he had just been to a bookstore and had some books. He was teaching a class on the power of one, you know, what one person can do in trying to get young people empowered. But I went home, and I just, this man was really interesting. I just Googled his name, and I found him, and it turned out he was like 87.
Wow.
And he was just so energetic and so happy to be there with all of these people.
There, I saw quite a number of people in wheelchairs, people on crutches. I mean, it was just very heartening to see the effort that everybody put into just being there and getting there, and how much they were enjoying it. This group here was focusing on climate justice, which is a whole other area of discussion of why people are involved in the climate movement, because very often, almost always, the people who feel the impact the most low-income minorities, people who are affluent tend to be on higher ground.
Right.
And the people who live along the shores and the older neighborhoods, because many cities grew up from the shores outward, and so the older neighborhoods and the tenement buildings and the shacks, are all along the waterfronts where we're losing ground due to rising sea levels.
And if you look globally, the countries that have contributed the least to greenhouse gases and have benefited the least from the combustion of fossil fuels are suffering the most for the cost, and that's just not fair.
Right. And then there's the whole issue of where fracking wastes are stored, where coal ash is stored, and it's always in the poor neighborhoods, it's always in the poor rural areas where people don't have any political power to fight them off, and so climate justice is a huge issue. It's the reason that the NAACP has become involved in climate change issues and the fracking movement in North Carolina. Not that they don't understand the other issues involved, but that's a big one because it's impacting mostly low-income minorities, African Americans, Hispanics, Native Americans, all of who are very well represented at this moment.
Yes. Just keeps going.
It just
and
keeps
going.
going and going. It's quite remarkable. And so what was the bus ride like? Were you on the same bus when you
Yes.
came from Asheville? And how long? It was like 12 hours, I imagine, right?
About
14.
14 hours.
How many people were on the bus?
53.
And just one bus. I understand there were like 12 or 15 buses from North Carolina. There were a bunch from Charlotte.
All sorts of buses. I had a
Winston-Salem,
lot of friends at Warren Wilson College who wanted to come, and I said, "There's no room on the Asheville bus. It's full. Too many people want to come." Like we had to send people. We had people going out of Charlotte, people going out of Durham, people going out of Boone. We couldn't get enough seats going to New York to fill a demand that wanted to be there.
Yeah. That's great. And so what was it like? I mean, did people sleep on the bus, or was there any singing going on, or anything like that?
One of the Green Grannies was
Oh,
on the bus,
yeah.
and so we did have a little singing.
So explain who the Green Grannies are.
Well, they're kind of an offshoot of the Raging Grannies, so that they're Asheville's version of the Raging Grannies.
Don't frack Mother Earth.
Yeah. So the Green Grannies sing songs about the earth, and they show up at hearings or things like this.
And they kind of write their own versions.
They write their own words
Yeah,
to songs. Is what they do.
they do a good
And then they
job.
encourage others to sing along with them.
And so there was only one Green Granny on the bus?
Well, actually, there were two.
Yeah.
So, or maybe three.
And did they lead the group?
Yeah,
They
they led
did.
the group in song.
Uh-huh.
I enjoyed the bus ride a lot. It was really nice to make those connections and to go through it with a lot of other people.
So I'm interested, what was it like coming back on the bus?
We were exhausted. What it was like. No, it was a real sense of accomplishment. And we did it. And we have just completed this thing that we know no one on that bus is going to forget for as long as they live.
So tell me what happened. I got down to 42nd Street. We went across 42nd Street and then turned onto 11th Avenue. But we thought that we were going to walk all the way down 32nd Street, but it was already packed all the way back up to 40th Street, and they weren't letting anybody go further down at that point. At what point did you end the march?
Well, we were told that the march was going to be over by 3:30, I think, and we needed to be back at the bus at 4:30, so we had to leave before it was over.
So you didn't march all the way down to the
No,
end?
I didn't anyway.
I started out a little bit closer to the start of the march than you did, and I marched all the way to the end. And I want to say it was a long march. It was a really long, hard march.
So
and
how
my feet
far,
started
where did
to
you
hurt.
end up?
I can't remember the street names of where I ended up. Partially because I felt so exhausted by the time we reached the end. And I remember thinking, like, along the way, like, there were times like, I can't keep doing this. My feet hurt, and like this is I've got a long way to go.
Runner.
Yeah, I'm a cross country runner.
You could have run it, you just couldn't walk it.
But I think it was really indicative of like the climate fight. That it's gonna feel really long, and there's gonna be times when you're standing still and you're not going anywhere, and it's gonna feel so frustrating, and you're gonna say, we haven't changed it yet, but we just
were moving,
gotta keep walking. Yeah.
They were moving somewhere. They were moving.
And so, okay, so you went down to near the end of the march, I guess, on 11th,
I reached the end of the march.
which was where you don't know where it was, but it was below 42nd Street
Yeah.
on 11th Avenue.
Mm-hmm.
And where was the bus waiting for you?
11th and 35th.
Oh, okay, so it was near the end. You didn't have to walk all the way back
No.
up to catch the bus. Where did the bus leave you off in the beginning? Oh, you had to take
No. We were dropped off in New Jersey, and then we took a train
The night
to Penn
before,
Station.
we slept
Yeah.
in a church in New Jersey the
And
night
then you
before.
took the subway up to Columbus Circle.
Well, actually, we walked from Penn Station.
You walked all the way up to
Right.
80 to 70 something street?
Right.
Wow, that's a long walk.
Well,
That's,
we had.
yeah,
we
but
had-
it's
was-
interesting. It was New York City, right?
It was great. We enjoyed
Yeah.
it. We enjoyed it.
I think it's really inspiring to think of how far this movement has come in the past 5 years. But it's put itself on a map in a way that if I were graduating 10 years ago, I wouldn't know where I would start fighting for the climate, for justice. But now there are so many avenues, there are so many places to go. And it's just become such a powerhouse. And it's been 6 years since the Keystone XL pipeline was first proposed, and it still hasn't been built.
That's right.
And companies are pulling out of it because it's taking so
So,
long.
were you at any of the Keystone XL pipeline demonstrations at the White House?
I chained myself to the White House fence and got arrested
Really?
for it.
Oh, you're hardcore. Okay, yeah.
It's really one of the more.
Were you arrested with Bill McKibben when he was?
No, I was actually part of the key organizers of an action called the XL Descent, which was 370 some college students that all got arrested in front of the White House. It was the largest demonstration for this movement of just youth to date. Largest civil disobedience movement. Getting arrested in Washington, D.C. is really one of the least ramification-filled arrests that you can make.
Well, but it's not, because it's part of building the movement. I mean, I was at the week of action that took place 2 years ago, I guess. That was amazing. I mean, 1,200 something people were arrested over the course of that week, and Gene was there as well. And if you recall, that's when Hurricane Irene came through. There was actually an earthquake in Washington, D.C. before the demonstration started, before the arrests started. The biggest earthquake that had been recorded in known history in Washington was like 5.9. They had to close the Washington Monument for years after that. And then Hurricane Irene happened, and it was going on at the same time that the Martin Luther King Monument area of the mall was opening up, and they were going to have a dedication that week, and over 1 million people were expected to come to the D.C. Mall, and they had to cancel it because of the hurricane that was coming through. But the XL pipeline demonstration went on. And in fact, we did cancel for a day so that we didn't want to divert the police attention from
Right.
Yeah.
the
Right.
emergency services
Right.
they might have to
Right.
perform during the hurricane. And as it turned out, the hurricane actually somewhat bypassed Washington, D.C., and then went up into Vermont and
Right.
destroyed the area where Bill McKibben lives. I mean, there were bridges that were hundreds of years old that were destroyed.
The old
It was
covered bridges.
terrible flooding and whatnot. But that was an amazing display of determination by the demonstrators in D.C. And yeah, it didn't have the ramifications or apparent ramifications of this, but it went a long way.
And it was all building towards
Yes.
this.
That's right.
Everything we've done so far has been
A leg
building
here,
the
a leg
connection
there.
so that we can come together for something powerful.
That's
And this is building for what's coming next.
That's right.
Because this UN summit was just the world leaders coming together to plan for the real UN summit in Paris next year. And that's when we're really going to watch the world turn out.
That's not a UN summit. I think that's a climate
Yeah.
summit.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I believe. Yeah, and that's right. And we don't know what's going to happen there yet, but certainly it will be huge. And I imagine there will be simultaneous demonstrations all over this country as well when that happens.
It's just exciting to see how fast it's growing. From
It's-
2012, we had 350 worked as hard as it could and got 40,000 people in the streets. A few years later, work as hard as you can, you get 400,000. A few years from now, who knows what numbers we'll have and the power we'll wield around the
And
world.
that's what has to happen. But I think it has to happen. It has to break out of not just being demonstrations. I think
Mhm.
we really need to get into grassroots, nitty-gritty work.
There's got to be people in the free market selling solar panels,
Yeah.
putting wind on the grid. There's got to be people in policy making sure we have the right incentives, that we have good renewable portfolio standards. We've got to get people in the suing for the right people and defending the right people in the legislature.
And we have to get people to vote.
To vote.
Vote, people. You know, I mean, there's no reason to sit out an election now. We have to make climate change into a campaign issue, and it's becoming that. It's just beginning to come to that. But it's necessary not only to vote, but when there are candidate debates, you know, and public forums, we all need to go to those forums and ask questions about climate change. Make it an issue that the candidates have to address.
In the most recent Obama-Romney debates, there was a climate silence. There was no prompts or questions about climate
Right.
change. And partly because of this march and the momentum that's been growing, I can guarantee you that won't be an issue. I mean, climate change will be an election issue in the coming presidential
It came up
election.
in a Madison County commissioner forum. And they all said they believed it was real and we need to start working on it.
Well, and that's what we need to get them to say. And we need to ask them, you know, what will you do about it when you get into power? You know, will you support legislation for restructuring utility rates? You know, will you change standards for auto emissions? Will you, you know, all of the issues, will you promote incentives for renewable energy? And will you create an energy efficiency bank that will issue low interest loans to industries and residents for installing solar energy systems and putting and investing in energy efficiency? We have, these are the nitty-gritty issues we really have to bring into the political system. We need to make candidates confront these issues and promise to address them, and we have to make sure they know how to address them, because very often it's just a matter of ignorance, and it's up to those of us who have that knowledge and that consciousness to spread that knowledge and make sure that the right people know what has to be done.
State representatives don't have the staff that can advise them. They
That's right.
depend on
Yeah.
someone, and if that someone happens to be Duke Energy, that's the information they're getting.
No.
So,
And you know, very often,
Yeah.
like you'll do a petition, you know, and you'll gather several hundred signatures, and it almost feels like you're not doing anything. You know, you don't see the results of that. But it's important. Again, it's a building process. Every little piece of information, every show of support, you know, is another peg in another Legos in the block in the building.
And no matter where you are, there's more than you could ever imagine to do, to become involved in, to step up and start helping with. Here in Western North Carolina, we have fracking that's threatening our water for the first time, and we have to hold that at bay. Wherever you are, there's some issue that's going to strike close to home that you can become locally involved with and make a difference.
And there's so many different ways of helping and so many different issues, and they all matter. And we all get to appreciate what other groups are doing, what other people are doing, and support them. We don't necessarily have to do what they're doing,
Right.
but we just need to appreciate them.
And I think that's an issue too. You know, sometimes there's sort of a leadership struggle
Right.
within the
And
environmental
there's so much to
community.
do. We don't need to struggle.
We don't need to do that. All we need to do is support each other. Okay, so you might be focusing on fracking, you might be focusing on coal ash. That's fine. And the Canary Coalition may be focusing on rate restructuring. I'll support your work on fracking and coal ash if you support my work on rate restructuring. And that's how we get along. Allow people to take areas of leadership. You know, don't struggle and compete with each other. Let people do what they want to do and support them. And I think we need to learn that lesson of mutual support.
And I think the common denominator of climate change is teaching us that lesson. It all comes back to this one issue that's core to all of us. And we're seeing unparalleled coordination between groups like Greenpeace, Sierra Club, and smaller advocacy groups like the Canary Coalition. And it's a common denominator for everyone, really. It's what we all share the same future. Mother Earth is teaching us the lesson that no matter who you are and where you come from, all of humanity shares one fate, and together we're going to decide what that fate looks like.
We're going to live or die together. You know, this is the only planet we have. There may be other livable planets out there, but we can't reach them in our lifetimes. And yeah.
There's my uncle.
Oh, really?
My dad.
Is that true?
Yeah, I just saw him.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah, pretty soon we're going to see the faith community coming through. It's pretty amazing watching all of this happen, and just all of these causes coming together.
And my dad, for instance, is not
Love you, Mom. Yeah.
He's not someone. Oh, and there I am.
Really?
Yeah, in the white hat, just walking by.
How about that? Really? How about that?
Caught myself.
Okay, well, I'm way back.
My dad is someone who climate change is not the issue that speaks to him. He grew up caring about gun control, tobacco issues, those sorts of things. But he came out to this march. And he came and he marched. He came up from Baltimore and marched in New York City.
No way.
Because
really?
it's starting to touch everyone. And it's an issue everyone cares for and is willing to walk in the streets about. No matter what the issue that speaks most to you is, climate change is something you're going to take action on because we all share one future.
Well, it's hard to deny, you know, with the extreme weather patterns that have taken place in the last few years, Hurricane Katrina and what was the hurricane that hit New York City?
Sandy.
Sandy, yes.
And Typhoon Haiyan in the Philippines.
Yeah. The people in New York City became radicalized on climate change from that. And not just New York City, up and down the eastern seaboard, wherever people were hit. I mean, New Jersey got devastated by Hurricane Sandy. And, I mean, it's like watching Godzilla or something, you know, to understand what happened to the city at that time. Subway tunnels were flooded. I mean, this is stuff of science fiction. Stuff that we thought might happen someday in the future is happening now. And when people are confronted with that and it hits home, then they become activated. Here's Noah's Ark.
Oh, that's tremendous.
That's brilliant. Another great demonstration of the creation care movement that's coming.
Yeah.
Where are all the animals? They only have room for
Yeah,
people.
yeah.
They left all the
They're down
animals.
below.
Yeah, they're down below.
Look at that bicycle. That's a great bicycle.
Yeah, so we've been watching for, what, almost an hour, and this is still the beginning of the
Yes.
march.
Well, yeah, this isn't almost the begin. This isn't really just the beginning of the march, but it was condensed. I mean, we have taken about 4 hours of footage and condensed it into about 1 hour.
Well, I haven't seen anything. I saw that day yet. But it's still all new. And one thing that impressed me was up on the hill. I can't remember if it's that when we turned, the people meditating
Yeah.
on those rocks. Did you see that?
I didn't see that. No.
Oh, did you see that?
It was really beautiful.
I mean, I felt it first.
Hmm.
I think I really did, and looked up there, and all of these people.
There's the globe. Somebody's got the
Amazing.
globe.
Yeah, there were a group of people sitting
about
in
30
silence,
people, is it? Yeah.
silence, contemplation.
Just on some rocks in Central Park.
Yeah. They're up
Pretty
high.
clearly in solidarity with the march
Yeah.
going by.
I'm not sure what this was. I guess that's also the Earth. Something, but they were being lifting it up and
Well,
down.
there was, maybe it was not, probably not that, but there was someone that had, some group that had something like that, and they were sending off little balls that were painted like globes
Oh.
that they were tossing, and then those were going through the crowds too, and then they get moved back up to
At
the,
one point, there was one point where the people had birds on sticks that were really beautiful also. There was a whole flock of these
Huh.
birds. They look like, I don't know, they're large. They were large birds. I'm not sure if we have met. Okay, so at this point we started marching. And this was what it looked like marching down 6th Avenue. After it turned off of Central Park south and started going down
oh, okay.
toward 42nd Street.
I remember going to New York as a teenager and walking through the streets and looking up at some of the buildings and thinking, how are we ever going to make an equitable world? Like, just look how tall these buildings are. Like, how can we ever stand up and make some of the changes we want to change? And I looked at some of those same buildings in a crowd of 400,000, and I felt sure that we can do
We
this.
can do that. There was some great chanting going on as we were marching. I mean, it was just such a lively crowd, and so much was going on. Yeah, this man here was leading the chant.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the marching bands that were in the
Yeah,
parade. They really livened everything.
yeah, there was some brass bands and then just people chanting with their voices. Which was amazing. Well, we're just about at the end here. I think we're going to let it go out. I want to thank Jamie and Jean for joining us. And we'll have this up on YouTube as soon as I can edit it. And this has been great. I think that we gave people a flavor of what happened and some inkling of what's to come, or at least some of the things that we can do
Together.
Together.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Well,